So I'm Steve, Steve White, and Jamas. I have Jamas here too. We're from Statistics New Zealand, and yeah, we've been doing some outlier modeling review for based on what we've seen and how COVID's affected our New Zealand time series. So I'll put those slides up. Can you guys see that?
Yes, looks good.
Awesome. Thanks. Right. So yeah. So this talk is motivated by COVID stuff affecting time series. So we COVID started affecting New Zealand time series in early 2020. No surprise there. To handle that those events in our time series, we implemented a sort of ad hoc outlier methodology. We weren't really fluent in using the typical outlier models like AOs and level shifts and things like that. So we put together kind of a rapid response where we just manually modeled additive outliers. It's sort of fix and go. So we did a significance test each new period, and if it was the critical value, if the T statistic was above the critical value of 2, then we put an AO in it. So it was very, yeah, manual, and it worked well. But now we've got a lot more time and data to revise what we've done, and basically the objectives of our analysis was to address the current issues, which we highly suspect that the critical value of 2 is too low, and that we're over modeling things. And the other issue we have with our series is we've got over 2,000 series that we manage, and it's a big burden on analysts. We have limited resource, so we wanted to save time there. So, and then the general objective was to develop a general approach to outliers, so that we're prepared for any future extreme events. So yeah, basically the way we worked that was implementing the Pareto 80-20 rule, and we hypothesized that 80% of our series are actually, quite simple to handle and similar to what we were doing. And so we wanted to classify those simple cases, and they are ones that don't really require any pre-treatment at all, or they require only additive outliers. And yeah, we propose that they can be automatically handled in X-13-ARIMA seats. And so then the other 20% is the complex cases, and we think that we can use automation to help detect, but we also believe that we really need to rely on our subject matter areas to help make that decision. So so we use X13 to do the classification, or to come up with an initial classification. So we set a critical value of 3.75. We turned on the automatic detection algorithm to look for AOs, level shifts, and temporary changes, starting with early 2020 when COVID events started happening. And so according to the previous slide, we classified AOs, and nothing detected as simple and everything else as complex. So this is the result. The yellow bar is what we had been doing. And so we've only been implementing additive outliers or nothing. And then the purple bars is the result of running the algorithm on our 2000 series. And so each number on the x-axis will be a time series. And so everything from TC downward would be categorized as, or preliminarily categorized as complex. And we've also, due to having other categories and also due to raising the critical value, that you'll see that the AO category from yellow to purple went down. So we've modeling a lot less additive outlier only with this scenario. And then we've just got this residual category at the top, out of span, RSC equals 0. That's just residuals stuff. And so I just comment about critical values. Do we care about type 1, type 2 errors? To an extent, but like our main concern was ensuring the performance of the X11 algorithm. So this table is just how many false positives could we expect with the critical value of 2 and how many with 3.75. But like I said, we're less concerned about false positives and more concerned about the quality of X11. And so how do we choose the 3.75? Well, we took guidance from the X13 manual. We wanted to just choose a starting point and then choose some tests that we cared about to test the reasonability of that choice. So we took the advice from the paper by Chang, Tao, and Chen, estimation of time series parameters in the presence of outliers. And so according to that guideline, a 3.75 would be a medium or low sensitivity. And so the way that we went about testing, if that made sense, was looking at the quality statistics and or the Q-stat and looking at revisions. So this is the result of basically over the 80% cases, the simple cases. We looked at what the Q-stat was with what we're currently doing on the x-axis, and what the Q-stat of the series would be using automatic detection as outlined in the previous slide. And so if there was no effect on the Q-stat, then it would just all sit on the line. And I've drawn a green box to indicate 1 as our typical threshold for below 1 being of acceptable quality. And I was pretty happy with that one. You don't see anything up in the upper left-hand quadrant, so nothing that was acceptable, but then not with the automatic choice. And yeah, so I've also labeled the dots. If a series had AOs in it, before and after, it would be AO to AO. And if we removed some, or if removed AO modeling completely, it would have gone from AO to none, or none to AO would be vice versa. And then purple, not seasonally adjusted. So quite understandably, some of those ones on the upper part of the line, we're not seasonally adjusting because they're not high quality enough. Yeah, so revisions. So this slide is really just a review. So I calculated revisions outside of the X13 program because I didn't know how, if it was going to reselect the outlier models each pass, and probably a lot of you know the answer to that. But I wanted to look at the revisions of what would actually, what are we actually going to see revised from publication to publication. So I wanted to get one measure per series, since we're trying to look at 2,000 plus series. And so I took the average period to period absolute percent revision. And so that would be overall points in the series and overall revision periods from the start of COVID. So that was sort of the interesting period. So that's sort of why I chose that one, is because we were highly active with outlier modeling ever since the onset of COVID. So yeah, and hopefully that formula looks familiar, but it would just be yeah, looking at all the revision periods from the start of COVID up until the most recent period. Yeah, and so this is the results here. I've labeled the axes similar to the QStat graph. And unsurprisingly, there's a tendency to revise more when you turn on the automatic outliering. And that's, you know, probably due to, well, to some extent, the boundary conditions where in some periods the outlier might be flagged or some where it may not, or it's basically doing miniature modeling reviews. So every time it reviews a selection, it will probably affect the revisions. And actually, interestingly, in the right-hand side where we're already seeing high revisions, I noticed that the automatic outliering tended to reduce those, which is interesting, but I don't have an explanation for why at the moment. Right, so implementation. So yeah, so basically we've got a bunch of different output areas, and we want to roll out by area, and basically start with the ones that are least sensitive to revisions and least sensitive to or least affected by outlier events in general. And so we still need to decide on setting a span for the automatic detection. In like a world where we didn't care about revisions at all, we'd just apply it to the whole series. But because we do care about revisions, we might consider setting the span at the beginning of 2020, for example, or even consider leaving what we've already done with the manual detection in place. And then so we also need to have some guidelines for handling border cases. So where we get the T values that come up to around 3.75, we don't want those to flag on and off every time we get a new data point. So just the initial stab at handling that is just making sure we're monitoring them, and if they are borderline, then just put them in manually. And so follow up to that is we need to create monitoring tools so that all our areas can keep tabs on what the automatic algorithm is doing and where it's placing the AAOs. Yeah, and so the next step is digging into the complex outlier types, and we do want to use some automated methods to further subset to the series to some obvious cases, structural break tests, but we really do want to rely on the subject matter area, because you know, if it's something like a level shift, we should have to have real world evidence. So we want to ultimately allow them to come to us with that hypothesis, and then, you know, we then, you know, do the test. So I'll ask, there's basically a minute left. I'll see if I can potentially answer any questions. And I'll also just check the contact information up here. So I'll just invite someone to ask a question.
All right, Tucker was asking, in the revision figure, what was that blue line?
Yeah, let's see. Yeah, I think to be honest, that was that's nothing that was like super carefully done. I think that's probably a low S line. It's auto fit line that came out of R. So I'm not attaching any specific significance. It's just for interpreting the points. But I think it's a low S.
While we're here, I had a question about this too. For this graph, you're only doing automatic outlining. I'm sorry, automatic outliers. Right? So those borderline cases could be going in and out for this. graph?
Yeah, very well could be. Yeah, because what we did was we took what we manually did and we stripped it out and we just said, oh, what if we handled it in this alternate way where we, let automatic detection do everything. And so, yeah, there's no attempt to handle border cases.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Thank you. All right, we have a question on the chat from Marina. Can you please expand more on the monitoring tools and dashboards you developed to decide whether or not to keep the AO automatically identified in previous runs while minimizing revisions?
Yeah, so basically we have a homegrown R package. It was developed as a proof of concept by a former colleague, Chris Hansen. It's a package we call SAG, and it's just an R wrapper around X13. I later picked it up and added some tools to it. And I'm certainly aware of the seasonal package that's out there. At the time when I put some development effort into it, we really wanted to have something that could handle batches, because the big difficulty with this project was trying to handle a whole lot of series at once. And so the focus with that SAG package is that we wanted to handle batches. And so basically, if we wanted to modify a spec to a whole batch or a list of batches, then we could parse in the spec file and say, add this parameter to the existing spec parameter. So that really helped us kind of scale up this sort of review. And actually, we've just recently put SAG on GitHub. So it is up since a couple of days ago, actually publicly available. But we're also aware that seasonal has developed as well. So, but if anyone wants a link to that GitHub, it'll just be the Statistics New Zealand or Statistics NZ GitHub page, and it's called SAG.
Okay, thank you. Oh, and Jamas put the link up there. It's in the chat now.